These are the papyrus scrolls of Herculaneum, 1,800 ancient books written on sheets of plant fiber, flash-seared by the volcanic heat.
For centuries, the charred scrolls of Herculaneum were nothing more than blackened cylinders that no one could read. Every attempt to open them failed. Historians accepted that whatever those scrolls contained was gone forever.
People didn't understand what they had, so some scrolls were actually thrown away or burned, and you can't put.
But now, for the first time, X-ray technology has begun to expose the writing hidden inside them. And the words emerging from the ash are not ordinary. They point toward a lost chapter of Roman history that was never meant to disappear.
The real scroll has to be oriented, right, in exactly this position so that it'll go in there just as it should.
The library that should not have survived. When workers first carved tunnels through the hardened volcanic material of Herculaneum in the 18th century, they thought they were uncovering ordinary ruins. They expected damaged walls, broken pottery, and scattered objects from a normal Roman household. Instead, inside one of the larger rooms, they found rows of black cylinders stacked tightly on shelves. In the dim tunnels, these objects looked like pieces of firewood. Several were reportedly tossed aside because they seemed useless. Some were even burned by workers who had no idea what they were handling. That misunderstanding changed quickly once scholars examined the fragments more closely. They were not wood, they were books. Nearly 1,800 of them. A wealthy Roman estate, later identified as the Villa of the Papyri, had preserved the only completely intact ancient library ever found. The reason the scrolls survived was unusual. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, the heat was so extreme that it changed the papyrus before it could burn. Instead of turning into loose ash, the papyrus was cooked into carbon. The outside of each scroll formed a brittle shell, while the inner layers collapsed into tight, compressed sheets. During this process, the ink also carbonized. It became the exact same color as the papyrus. This meant there was no visible contrast left for the eye to detect. The writing was still inside the scrolls, but it was hidden within layers that had fused together. The structure was so fragile that opening the scrolls was not only risky, it was physically impossible. Any attempt to separate the layers caused them to break apart into powder. Early researchers tried every technique available at the time. They built machines to unroll the scrolls slowly. They used softeners and glues. They tried lifting sheets with thin blades. According to reports, each method followed the same painful pattern. A few words might appear, then the rest of the scroll would collapse. Entire texts were destroyed in minutes. The failures caused worry and frustration within the scholarly community. Some experts argued that the scrolls should never be touched again. Others kept pushing for new methods, even though none of them worked. Over time, the scrolls became known as time bombs of knowledge. One wrong move could erase a voice from the ancient world forever. Conservators handled each cylinder with extreme caution, but even the safest procedures could not reveal the writing buried inside. Researchers documented the scrolls, studied their shapes, and produced long reports, yet most never saw more than a few broken sentences. Decades passed, and new tools still could not see through carbon. Many experts began to accept that the library would remain silent. The scrolls waited in storage rooms and museum cases for generations. They were preserved but completely unreadable. It created a strange reality. Humanity had an intact ancient library, yet no method to reach the words inside it. For many experts, it felt like the mystery had reached a dead end. But the story of these scrolls was not finished. It was only a matter of time before a team of experts stepped forward to challenge the impossible. Centuries of failure that defined the scrolls. One of the earliest documented attempts to solve the mystery of the scrolls involved a respected archaeologist named Antonio Piaggio. According to historical accounts, he assembled a team of 5 specialists. The team included a conservator, a chemist, a papyrus expert, and 2 assistants trained specifically to handle fragile artifacts. Together, they were given 10 scrolls for testing. These scrolls were regarded as some of the best preserved in the entire collection. Piaggio and his team approached the work slowly. They examined each scroll with basic magnifying tools and lamps, searching for any weak point or natural separation in the layers. When they found none, they built a controlled unrolling device. It was a simple instrument by modern standards, but for their time it represented the most advanced conservation method available. Their goal was to peel the scrolls apart layer by layer without breaking the carbonized material. The first attempt took days. The team worked through long hours, adjusting the mechanism millimeter by millimeter. According to reports, the tension inside the room increased with every turn of the machine. Light struck the thin sheet, and for a brief moment, faint markings seemed to appear. Piaggio later wrote that for a few seconds the entire team believed they had succeeded. They stood over the scroll in complete silence, afraid to move. Then the layer collapsed. It crumbled into powder that slipped through the machine and scattered across the table. The room, which seconds earlier had felt hopeful, returned to despair. The other scrolls were tested in similar ways, and although a few letters were recovered, every attempt ended with damage. Some scrolls split apart suddenly. Others dissolved into fragments so small they could not be collected. That brief moment of light became a painful memory for the team because they had come so close without gaining anything lasting. Failures like these pushed scholars to look for alternative methods. In the 19th century, chemical solutions were introduced. Researchers believed softening agents could relax the layers enough to separate them safely. Instead, many of the scrolls warped or melted. Unverified reports mention heated arguments during those years, with some researchers blaming others for being reckless or impatient. The entire field became divided between those who wanted innovation and those who wanted caution. The damage eventually forced museums to intervene. Most institutions decided the scrolls should be stored untouched until safer methods existed. The scrolls were placed in controlled environments, wrapped on padded supports, and displayed behind protective glass. They were preserved, but they remained unreadable. Photography arrived with great hope, but the results were disappointing. The blackened surfaces absorbed nearly all visible light, which made every photograph the same blank image. Early X-ray technology did not help either, but ink and papyrus were identical under those conditions. As decades passed, frustration grew. Conferences turned emotional. Scholars argued, speculated, and disagreed on every method. Many experts believed the scrolls would remain silent forever. Even after centuries of failure, the fragments spoke just enough to suggest that something deeper was trapped inside the sealed scrolls. Why these scrolls matter more than anyone realized. During the 18th and 19th century attempts, some scrolls cracked or tore while researchers tried to unroll them. A few sections broke off in larger chunks. These fragments became the only parts that could be examined without causing further damage. Scholars collected them, flattened them, and recorded every letter they could find. Some of these pieces contained philosophical reflections that focused on human behavior, moral choices, and emotional struggle. A few lines mentioned fear, pleasure, anger, and self-control. These ideas did not read like distant academic exercises. They felt like direct observations from someone who was watching daily life lose its sense of stability. According to several researchers, the tone did not match calm philosophical writing. It suggested a person trying to understand a world that no longer felt predictable. Other fragments carried a heavier emotional weight. The surviving lines hinted at unease beneath the surface of ordinary routines. They spoke of tension among individuals, sudden changes in trust, and a growing sense that people were unsure of each other. None of the pieces described specific events, yet the mood was unsettled. A few scholars pointed out that one fragment contained a phrase that could be translated loosely as a troubled morning. While the meaning is uncertain, researchers noted that the wording felt personal and reflective rather than theoretical. Nothing in these lines pointed to clear historical incidents, but the feeling they conveyed was not peaceful. They suggested that the writer sensed shifts in the world around them but could not describe them openly. As more fragments were recovered, scholars began to realize that these writings might contain insight into how individuals understood emotional strain during their time. The small pieces already challenged long-held assumptions about daily life and personal ethics in the late Republic. Every new fragment reopened discussions about how people coped with uncertainty, how they viewed their own weaknesses, and how they interpreted moments of tension within their communities. Some experts even suggested that the villa's collection might preserve thoughts that were never shared publicly. With each discovery, it became clearer that the Herculaneum library was not a simple private bookroom. It felt intentional. The fragments hinted at deeper reflections hidden inside the sealed scrolls. Some researchers believed the unopened texts could reveal how individuals experienced rising anxiety and moral confusion in their society. This possibility created a new sense of urgency. The sealed scrolls were no longer seen as quiet artifacts. They were potential witnesses to the emotional atmosphere of a world that was changing in ways that ordinary records could not capture. This rising suspicion pushed researchers to look beyond traditional methods until modern innovators decided to approach the problem from a completely different direction. The global effort to break the scroll's silence. As the years passed and traditional methods continued to fail, a completely different kind of movement began to form. Instead of archaeologists and papyrologists working alone, computer scientists, coders, and machine learning experts started taking an interest in the Herculaneum mystery. This new wave of curiosity led to the creation of the Vesuvius Challenge, an international competition that invited anyone with technical skill to help decode the unreadable scrolls. According to several reports, the response was immediate and surprising. People from different countries signed up within days, including university students, independent programmers, and experienced engineers. The challenge attracted a wider audience than anyone expected. The organizers released high-resolution scans of unopened scrolls to the public. These scans contained thousands of layers of carbonized papyrus packed tightly together. The images looked like tangled waves of black and gray, and to most people they seemed completely meaningless. However, participants with backgrounds in computer vision began developing algorithms to search for patterns inside the chaos. Some believed that faint variations in brightness might indicate the presence of ink. Others focused on the shapes of the layers, hoping to find clues that earlier tools had missed. As more teams joined, progress accelerated. Machine learning systems trained on ancient Greek characters began identifying small marks that looked like parts of letters. These marks were incredibly faint and would have been impossible to spot with the human eye. Yet the algorithms detected them with increasing confidence. According to reports from the competition, the first confirmed clusters of Greek characters caused excitement among the participants. It was the first time in history that text from a still-sealed Herculaneum scroll had been detected through raw computation. The breakthrough encouraged more coders to join. Students who had no background in ancient history suddenly found themselves working alongside professional papyrologists. Linguists began reviewing the outputs, checking whether the detected shapes matched known Greek handwriting styles. Over time, thousands of Greek characters were confirmed across multiple layers. The characters were not random. Many formed words that scholars recognized. Some of these words included fear, pleasure, judgment, and desire. These early findings suggested that the emotional themes discovered in earlier fragments were not isolated. They belonged to something larger and more structured. This raised new questions. Why were the same emotional terms appearing in multiple areas of the scrolls? Why were the themes repeating in a pattern? According to some researchers, the scrolls were beginning to look like a coordinated collection rather than a scattered assortment of texts. Teams involved in the challenge started comparing results, and they noticed that emotional, ethical, and political language appeared together in ways that seemed intentional. This strengthened the belief that the sealed scrolls contained a carefully curated body of work. These results brought excitement, but also a new sense of urgency. The algorithms had revealed important hints, but they could go only so far. The scrolls needed a tool powerful enough to reveal full lines of text without touching the fragile material. The X-ray experiment that changed everything. The search for a breakthrough eventually led researchers far from the ruins of Herculaneum to a laboratory that specialized in something completely different. This facility, known as the Diamond Light Source in Oxfordshire, was built for advanced atomic research. It produced beams of light far more powerful than anything used in normal imaging. According to several reports, some scientists believed that this technology might see what every traditional tool had failed to detect. Others were unsure and viewed the idea as a long shot. The stakes were high, and there was a real fear that nothing new would appear. A single carbonized scroll was selected for the test. Staff handled it with extreme care and placed it at the center of the machine. The researchers knew the scroll was nearly 2,000 years old and had never been opened by human hands. Once it was secured, the team activated a process known as phase contrast X-ray imaging. Unlike regular X-rays, this method focused on how light bends when it passes through different materials. Some believed that the tiny differences between papyrus and ink might finally be visible in these conditions. When the scan began, the monitor showed a familiar pattern. At first, the screen displayed only layered waves of gray. Those who had worked with earlier scans recognized the shapes and expected another failure. Several researchers watched quietly as the machine continued its work. The scroll's layers looked flattened and uniform, just as they had in every earlier attempt. The atmosphere in the room felt tense, and some feared that all the effort had been wasted. Then, the data started to shift. The beam revealed microscopic differences on the surface of the layers. The ink stood slightly higher than the papyrus. The difference was so small that no previous tool had detected it. As the image sharpened, faint ridges appeared. These ridges formed shapes. The shapes formed letters. According to people present in the laboratory that day, the room fell silent as the first characters became readable. It was the first time in history that an unopened Herculaneum scroll had revealed its writing. The excitement grew quickly. Letters began forming words, and the words carried meaning. Some of the first terms identified described emotion and conflict. The text showed signs of personal reflection and possibly even private commentary. It was not a random collection of markings. It had structure and intent. The scientists were not just seeing traces of ink. They were seeing the work of a writer who lived during the final years of the Roman Republic. This realization caused shock and disbelief among the team. After centuries of silence, the scroll was speaking. The success of this experiment proved that the scrolls were not lost. It confirmed that phase contrast X-rays could separate the hidden ink from the carbonized papyrus using tiny differences in height. The scroll had survived the eruption. The writing had survived the collapse of the layers. All that had been missing was a tool strong enough to detect it. The discovery was more than a scientific victory. It marked the moment when the Herculaneum Library opened its doors for the first time. But when scientists push deeper into the scans, the patterns inside the scrolls reveal something far more deliberate. Patterns beneath the ash and the history. Rome tried to bury. The researchers began noticing faint variations in the strokes that formed the letters. These variations were not mistakes or damage. They were signs that different people had written them. Each scribe pressed with a slightly different weight. Each shaped their letters with a different habit. According to several reports, this discovery shifted the atmosphere in the laboratory. It meant the scrolls were not produced casually. They were created by multiple trained hands working within the same environment. The collection now looked like the output of an organized archive rather than a private bookshelf. The scans also revealed that the manuscripts were not made at the same time. Differences in handwriting styles and the thickness of the layers suggested a timeline stretching across decades. This meant the villa's collection did not appear all at once. Someone had added new material gradually, as if they were documenting events as they unfolded. The idea slowly settled among the research teams. The villa of the papyri had been storing information with intention. It was becoming clear that this library was designed to preserve more than philosophy or personal reflection. As the X-ray passes reached another scroll, the researchers immediately noticed something unusual. The characters forming on the screen were not Greek. Greek was the dominant language of the villa, used for most philosophical writings. Latin appeared only in extremely rare cases, usually in manuscripts connected to political matters. The room grew quiet as the team realized they were seeing Latin inside one of the unopened scrolls. They adjusted the settings, allowed the beam to stabilize, and watched the letters sharpen. Then the name appeared. Seneca. Not Seneca the philosopher. This was Seneca the Elder, the historian whose most important work had disappeared from Roman history. His eyewitness account of the early Roman civil wars had been considered completely lost. Only references from later writers hinted that such a text had ever existed. Now the scans were revealing lines from that missing manuscript. Several researchers reportedly froze when the realization struck. One of them, according to an internal note, stepped away from the monitor and said he never thought this would be found. The recovered lines offered a view of Rome that no surviving text had preserved. They described fear inside the Senate. They mentioned political betrayals that shifted the balance of power. They listed conspirators who do not appear in official records. They detailed events that seemed to contradict the polished version of history written by later Roman authorities. Some scholars believe these names may have been removed deliberately during the consolidation of imperial power. Others argue that the text might have circulated quietly before being suppressed. Either way, the material carried the tone of someone describing danger in real time. With this discovery, the entire archive began to make sense. The philosophical fragments from earlier readings described moral decline inside Roman society. Seneca the Elder's recovered history described the political collapse that followed. One set of writings explained the cause, the other recorded the consequences. Together they formed a complete picture of a republic losing its stability from within and without. The Villa of the Papyri was not only a home, it was a vault built to preserve the truth behind Rome's fall. Now that this truth has surfaced, the question becomes what the remaining scrolls will reveal as the scans continue. The new Roman history emerging from the ash. The discoveries inside the Herculaneum scrolls have changed the focus of research entirely. For the first time, scholars are not wondering whether the scrolls can be read. They are wondering how much they will reveal. Dozens of scrolls remain sealed in volcanic debris, and many more lie unopened in museum storage. Each one carries the possibility of new voices that have been silent for nearly 2,000 years. The idea that these voices can finally be recovered has created a sense of urgency and excitement throughout the academic world. New scans are being scheduled every year. These machines use beams of light far stronger than those used in the first breakthrough. According to reports, early test images from the new sessions show letters inside scrolls that no one has ever touched. The characters appear as faint ridges on the scans, just as they did in the earlier discoveries. The consistency of these results proves that the method works, and that the sealed scrolls still contain intact writing. Some researchers believe the next wave of scans will identify entire pages of text. Researchers now view the Villa of the Papyri with greater clarity. It no longer appears to be a luxurious private home that happened to contain books. It resembles an intentional archive built to preserve memory beyond the lifetime of its owners. Some scholars believe the villa was designed to protect accounts of Rome that official histories later ignored or removed. This possibility has encouraged wider interest in the remaining scrolls, especially those still buried underground. Each new fragment that emerges reshapes the historical map. The accounts recovered so far challenge the long-accepted narrative written by those who survived the political conflicts of the Republic. The scrolls offer a different perspective, one that does not favor any ruling faction. Instead, they present the events through direct observation and personal reflection. This is the version of Rome that was buried beneath the ash. As the scans continue, a forgotten history is returning. It is emerging piece by piece from a library that should not have survived, carrying the voices of a world that refused to be erased. What do you think the remaining sealed scrolls are hiding, and which forgotten voices might still be waiting to emerge from the ash? Share your thoughts in the comments.